Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this very special session. If you are here already, can you say hi? Type it on the chat, please, or on the comment, I mean. Okay, so this is a very special thing that we are doing with our friend Stephen here. Now, before this session, we had a session that talked about the sustainable framework for financial planning, right? So that's the overall picture. Oh, hi, Louis. Now, so if you missed that episode, make sure you go back and look at that, right? It's important you have the total complete picture because today we're going to talk about the estate planning specifically, all right? So now, for those who are tuning in for the first time on this series, I'd like to introduce to you our friend Stephen. Stephen Yong here is the director and also a licensed financial planner, right? He's the director of Vantage, which is the top 5 financial education. He's also the director and founder of top 5 financial education site in Malaysia called MyPF.my. So make sure you check it out as well. And he's the director of Vantage. And aside from his experience in the financial industry, he's also a certified financial planner and Financial Planning Association of Malaysia. So he's definitely got the credentials to talk about this very important topic, I feel. And interestingly, Stephen actually, we share this commonality. We both graduate with a bachelor's in computer science. But Stephen went one step further and got an MBA, something that I hope to emulate one day. All right, so welcome again, Stephen.
Hey, Terence, and good evening, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to talk about estate planning, right? So, for me, right, I didn't actually understand this word estate planning until I can't remember, I think late 20s or early 30s, because the word estate in this context is kind of weird. For me, growing up, I know two types of estate: rubber estate and real estate.
Yeah, rambutan estate or the palm fruit tree estates, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes. And my grandfather got some rubber estate, right? And which actually caused some issues in the family because when he passed on, these things were not well thought through. So there were some issues about how to who among the siblings are supposed to get which part of the estate. So interestingly, that's quite related to this, right? And as I grew up, I also learned the term real estate. But when we talk about estate planning, it's so much more than real estate, isn't it, Stephen?
Most definitely. And I liked how you shared about estate issues about an actual estate itself. Right? Yeah, and that's so true. And this happens until today. I'm sure sometimes as you drive around, even in cities, etc., in the middle of skyscrapers, hotels, large buildings, and suddenly you see a house that's just there, dilapidated, just left abandoned, and most of the time it's actually due to estate issues. So imagine if the patriarch of the family passed away, and then it went down to the children, and then it went down to the grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Now suddenly you have a piece of property or land that there are 40, 50 people claiming on it. It's virtually impossible actually to get that sorted out. A lot of work and heartache, definitely.
That's right. So for those of you who just join us live, if you have any questions, right, please put it in the comment, and I'll bring it to Stephen at the end of towards the end of the session, right? Because I want to have a lot of questions for Stephen about this. Can we start with what is estate planning actually? Can you show us the context? What does it mean to do estate planning?
Sure, that sounds good. All right, let me share my screen as well. It's easier for us to follow as we go along as well. Right, so hopefully, by the end of this, 60 minutes that we have over here, at least you get an idea what really is estate planning, and really totally not just about a palm oil estate or rubber estate or fruit estate. Yeah, understand why it's so important really on estate planning, and what are the instruments out there. And there's just so many different instruments out there beyond just a will, actually, which is the most common thing that people think of when they come to think of estate planning. And then what would be the steps actually that it actually entails. And this is something that needs to be done and picked up, especially in our Asian culture in Malaysia as well. Asians, we don't like to talk about dying, right? About passing away. And if you talk with the older generation, some of them might even be, reacting very strongly to one who actually brings that up, but it really is so important as part of financial planning to look at estate planning and how we actually sort it out while one is still around and while one still has the mental faculties actually to make those decisions. Yeah, so we're covering all 5 of these areas, from the basics of estate planning, why it's important, tools, some and misconceptions when it comes to estate planning, and what is that process all about. Yeah. All right, so we kind of kicked off the discussion earlier with Terrence coming up and talking about how he actually viewed estates when growing up. It was the same for me as well. But in the context of estate planning that we're looking at, we need to define what is it. Yeah, so it's not just about assets, but the other key part of that, which is the minus of the balance sheet, the liabilities or the debt part, that actually needs to be taken account for. So the estate is only an estate after the distribution of all the assets minus all the liabilities. So if you have property, there's still a mortgage loans, etc. All that would actually need to be taken out of the equation before it actually forms the final estate to be distributed. And generally, they can be divided into 2 types of assets actually, movable as well as immovable. Other words often used is liquid or illiquid. And to just make it more confusing for you guys, sometimes you don't even see the word asset there. So it might be described as movable property and immovable property. So when you're looking at the context of an estate plan and you talk about property, property doesn't necessarily mean property as we know it, as in a building or a land or something that's actually tangible actually. So when you talk about property, it can be liquid or movable property. So these are things like your cash, your shares, any other savings accounts, your EPF, insurance, vehicles, etc. All that will be under movable or liquid. And then immovable ones will be things that are actually tied into real assets or real estate actually. So these will be things like commonly property, whether that's condo, land, residential, commercial, etc. Yeah. So that's an overview of the assets actually.
All right. So anything valuable can be classified under asset, right? Including stamp collection, Gundam collections, and all that. Correct?
That's a very good question there. So technically, it is an asset, but it needs to be actually viewed from the lens of the applicable laws actually. So for example, in Malaysia, things such as your stamp collection, etc., may not have monetary value. So thus, while it is probably a prize possession or asset for you, but from the view of the law, it is actually not viewed as an asset. So what happens then? Can you put it in the will? Does it not go in the will? Does it get distributed according to their wishes? So a short answer to that is yes, you can actually put it into your will, items of affection, etc., that you want to go to certain people, your book collection, stamp collection, whatever it is, just that it is actually not enforceable by law actually. So it actually will be listed as your wishes, and basically the executor would try their best actually to distribute it. So that's why it's so important on who you actually appoint as the executor to actually help with that distribution of your assets, including items, personal items, etc.
Right. So that means the definition of asset in this context is it has to be something that is registered to a name. Is that correct? Is that
not necessarily 100% of the time with a name. So certain things that have value, for example, like jewelry, or if you hold like physical gold, technically there's no name to attach to it, but it is recognized actually as an asset, as something that is of value actually. So really there's so much list of examples actually. So estate planning is one of those things that at the glance just looks very simple, right? Nowadays I can just go online, download some will template from somewhere and just fill it up, get my neighbor or friend to just witness it and there, kautim lah, it's not that easy. Estate planning is one of those things that looks very easy at a glance, but there's so many things that can happen. And honestly, even the best written plan, best written will, it's still not going to be ever 100% perfect. You just got to see what are the most common scenarios that you're potentially going to face. Are there things that will have the possibility of happening, and try to cover as much of those bases as you can. And basically, that's the approach. So it needs to be very personalized on how it actually needs to be written, what actually happens as well, and what sort of scenarios to be actually thinking of as well.
Okay. Yeah, I still have questions, but I'll keep that till later. I'll let you go on to the next one.
Sure. All right. So often when we look at estate planning, and even if you Google pictures of estate planning on search engines and all that, you see pictures of really old white hair folks, but that's really just society's common perception, one might even call it misperception actually when it comes to estate planning, that it's only for those who are actually old and or you're feeling ill or unwell and you're going to kick the bucket. But the thing is that none of us, only God knows, right, how long, each of us, how long our number days are for each and every one of us. And that can actually happen. I'm sure you've heard of scenarios where someone, even looking perfectly fit and healthy in the 20s, 30s, suddenly in the gym or somewhere and just collapsing or having a heart attack, stroke, etc., and just passing away actually. So it's something that needs to be considered even from an earlier age actually. Yeah. But with that, to distribute, you do need assets, of course, to distribute. So it only makes sense once you have actually, accumulated a certain number of assets, and there's no real hard figure, I would say, for anyone what those amount of assets are. But most of the time, if you have assets that actually would not fall under the Nomination Act. So just to kind of clarify what that means. So certain things actually, Malaysia's laws are actually very protective, which are good generally. So you have things like, your funds in your Employees Provident Fund, EPF or KWSP. You have things that you can do nominations like your insurance policies, unit trusts, private retirement schemes, and those would generally fall under the Nomination Act, where technically even without a will, you can actually list the nominations and it would go through. But the moment you start accumulating assets that go beyond that, out of these categories, I'll say probably at a minimum 100,000 and above in other assets, then it's high time actually, no matter your age, to actually look at the distribution of those assets itself.
Okay. Yeah. So now that we understand what it is, can you elaborate a bit more about why we need to do this? I think it's important for everybody, right? Regardless of what age. I mean, we get the point. Yeah, we don't know when accidents will happen, and we want to make sure that in case something happened to us, our assets are taken care of. But what if I'm still young, I don't have much in my bank account yet? Should I still consider doing this?
Sure. So there probably needs to be, at a certain timing actually. So basically the key decisions that come to mind are, all right, one is the amount of assets that you have, so the moment you have 100,000 or even 50,000, is something that you should already start considering. Just look at writing a very basic simple will, and it's actually not expensive. That's another misconception as well. Writing a basic will can be as low as less than 500 ringgit actually to write it out, and just solves a lot of the headaches, issues that could potentially go with that. Secondly is very important, and for most people this is when they take concrete steps, is the moment you actually have dependents actually. So dependents may be children, it may be even aged parents as well, anyone who's actually depending on you financially. Because if you don't actually put it in your will, then you don't actually have a say on how those assets get distributed. It actually falls back to the default distribution, which by default would go to, if you're unmarried, would actually go to your parents. Once you're married, it would go to your spouse, your parents, your children, if any. So you don't have that control actually. And how about if scenarios as well? Let's say you're married and with children, and what if both you and your spouse have an accident, pass away at the same time? Then what happens? Who's going to take care of the children? How are the assets going to be handled? And I'm not sure you guys saw this as well. This kind of blew up on social media, I think, just last year. That was this lady actually. Her parents passed away when she was really young, and basically she got sent off actually to stay with her grandparents. So from a very wealthy, well-to-do, just got sent off. Basically was given virtually nothing actually during that period of time, and her uncle, which was her late father's brother, actually took over the house, took over all the assets, sent the children off to fancy schools, and basically took all the money. And she found that she thought there was no way of actually getting it back actually. Thankfully actually, when she was, I think this was already in the late 30s, she managed to find a lawyer actually who heard of her issue and offered to take on the case without any charges.
Wow.
Of course, if he wins, then there's some agreement that he'll get some form of settlement for assisting, and yeah, they actually won and managed to recover at least a portion of the assets that would have been gone. So again, this happened because there was no proper estate planning put into place, and that's really so sad actually.
Yeah, good to know that despite not having those arrangement made, right, her in the end her rights are still protected. So who are the people that is actually governing the this space or this jurisdiction?
Sure. So when we look into estate planning, it also does depend on the number of assets that one has actually. All right. So let's start from the right actually. So amanah raya is basically a public trustee. So if you this only covers for movable assets, so basically things that are not physical property, things that are liquid investment, etc. And the total value needs to be below 600,000, and then you can actually go through this agency. The one in the middle is if your total assets, including your physical property, is 2 million or below, it actually goes through the estates of distribution unit, or basically for Malaysians, we call it pejabat tanah. Actually, that's a more commonly layman term actually used. But again, it only applies if assets are below 2 million, which may have made sense a number of years ago. But nowadays, the moment you buy a property and you have a little bit of other assets, you're very likely going to hit above the 2 million mark already. So anything above 2 million, you don't have a choice actually. It must actually go through the High Court actually for that process of administrating the will itself. Yeah, and if one is a Muslim, then it also needs to go through the far right courts as well before it actually goes through to the High Court. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. It kind of feel a bit daunting already at this stage. There's this agencies that we need to deal with. We need to go to court. But still, I think we want to emphasize it's important, right? So, what would be the worst thing that can happen if someone don't take care of their estate planning?
Right. A lot of possible scenarios can occur actually. One of it is that the assets may not even be known. Imagine that. So imagine a person passes away and the person was very secretive or protective or for whatever safety reasons never disclose those assets. So then there's a lot of assets that are actually not distributed just because nobody knows about it actually. Yeah, so the amount of frozen assets, the assets that have not been claimed, are just going up at a tremendous pace. In 2016, 60 billion. 4 years later, 2020, 70 billion. Latest numbers is over 90 billion actually in assets that are actually frozen. And our government, I won't speculate into the reasons why, but every few years there is talk actually about whether or not our government should be actually allowed actually to get access to all these frozen assets after a certain number of years, since it's actually unclaimed and there aren't actually no owners for that. Yeah. So the real risk is those assets are not there, or even if you know that they have assets, but you don't have it actually properly documented, don't have the estate in place. Imagine, for example, the husband passes away, and then the wife has to go around, with the death certificate going from bank to bank saying, "Oh, I think my late husband had an account with you. Actually, can you help to check? He has passed away." And the stress, imagine you're already grieving at the loss and going through this, trying to sort out the entire process and just working it through without a will. It can drag on actually 2 to 3 years. And if it is actually contested, it can drag on even more actually. Sometimes we hear of estates, being what is known as partially intestate, where certain parts may be executed, certain parts could not be. And it could actually drag on, 5-10 years or indefinitely, really.
Right. Yeah, I think at this point, we need to understand and get the point. It's just a responsible thing to do, as in, if you want to be responsible person, we've got to do this, right? Otherwise, the money that we have accumulated may just go to no man's land, right? And people could have benefit from it, even though you may be single, maybe you'd have even for people without dependent, you still want to be responsible for your wealth, right? You want it to be put to good use and not just sitting in an account where just sit there and rot. That's not a very responsible thing to do.
That's true. And again, there's so many scenarios, and it's virtually impossible to cover it all. But, for example, let's say you think, oh, I'm doing a responsible thing. I have my EPF, I've listed my nominations, my insurance policies, I've listed my beneficiaries, and you list, for example, your spouse for EPF. What if you and your spouse pass away together in a double tragedy kind of scenario? Do you notice that your EPF nominations, there's no substitute beneficiary that you can actually fill in? So you actually need to put it into your will. If in the event that in the EPF it cannot be executed, then at least there's a beneficiary to be put into place. And also with young children as well, who's actually going to be the guardian of your children, and are you actually going to give an allowance to the guardian? And we usually would suggest consider that, because then it actually specifies that, oh, this is the X amount that the guardian gets every month, which then means that the guardian cannot dip his or her hands into the rest of the funds as well that was actually supposed to go for a child. I'm just going to leave with one final scenario here. Is like, for example, if for example you have children and your children are minor, the moment they actually become legal adults, let's say at 18, imagine then at the point of time they'll get all the assets. So imagine you have a few million, at 18 years old, suddenly your child gets all those assets. Imagine how you were when you're 18 years old. If you suddenly got, a few million in assets, would you have that maturity actually to handle with that influx of money coming in? Would it attract, backhats, people trying to take advantage, of your child during that scenario? How then do you actually plan that out to make sure that, it's actually properly distributed and, the vast proceeds of it? Maybe you can have certain allocation for his or her tertiary education, but the vast funds of it probably at the stage where his or her, your child has a certain level of maturity actually before it gets distributed. So, again, a lot of considerations to put into place there.
Yeah, I think at this point, what the main point I get is that, estate planning is way beyond just putting down a nominee in your whatever account, right? There's so many other things to consider. And if we don't do this thoroughly, there'll be blind spots, right? And that's why we need to, I think for those of us who has a significant amount of wealth, we need to sit down with an expert to make sure that we cover all the blind spots and not wait until it's too late. Because like me, myself, and my wife, Kathleen, we kind of had this realization some time ago when, as Stephen said, when I was traveling together with my family, my parents, and my sister-in-law, who's one of the nominees of my wife's assets. So what we realized on that trip is that, hey, everyone is on the same plane.
So risk concentration there, just right there.
Correct. So that was a blind spot that we really recover. Thankfully, it wasn't too late. So let's talk about, let's go a bit deeper, right? I know at the very, very basic thing that every one of us can write a will on a piece of paper and get it legalized, so to speak. But I know there are a lot of other tools. So please help us go through that. What are the different type of tools available out there?
Sure. And you are right, Terence, that the first and foremost thing to be done is actually get the will writing done. As I mentioned earlier, it is not expensive. It can be as low as 500 ringgit, for a will coming up. Oftentimes as well, a number of will writing providers, if you write a will together with your family members, they even offer like a group package or discount as well, which makes it even more affordable. Yeah. So it is very expensive to pass away without a will actually, and it's not only at the point of actually writing the will. You need to be thinking, if you pass away without a will, then or basically, let's reverse that. With a will, it actually saves a lot of costs. It's a very low fee upfront. You get peace and benefit on mind. There would be optional services you can opt into, like appointing actually a trust company as the executor of your will. And the advantage of that is that even you can still appoint, let's say your spouse or a sibling, etc., as the executor, but we would still suggest that you won't want to appoint the trust company as the final executor if you're writing a will with a trust company. And the reason behind that is that it's actually a lot of work. Actually, it's a difficult time when grieving and trying to sort through all that. And basically, virtually everyone who has been forced to go through that circumstances, or saw maybe the parents or whoever going through that circumstances, know that no, this is not something that I would want to go through actually. So to actually leave it to experts to actually handle it for the execution, they provide services such as storage of your will, rather than potentially your will getting lost, reduces the likelihood of your will being disputed and all that. And in Malaysia, wills that are recognized still needs to be a hard copy physical form. Unlike our neighbors down south, like in Singapore, they already recognize actually digital wills. In Malaysia, there is digital wills, but it's only as a backup or a storage solution actually. So you still need that physical will copy over there. And there'll be things, of course, like nomination. So your nomination can be things like EPF, insurance policies, unit trusts, PRS, private retirement schemes can be under nominations as well. Assignment, so as an option, you can actually assign certain things to have a change for a legal owner. So for example, like if insurance policies actually can be assigned to someone else, or even a company or a business entity as a legal owner, for those who are looking at estate planning as part of key man insurance actually, in case something happens, to make sure that the business can actually continue running. There will be options such as trust as well. So setting up a trust which can be in different ways and forms. So basically the trust itself is also a separate entity as well. Yeah, and you can actually set up the trust that you can even start immediately, and you can even list yourself actually as the beneficiary of the trust, and you can actually put assets within it. So let's say you pass away, then the assets can actually continue to grow and can continue to generate returns and can continue to give out. It's a little bit like, you see in Hollywood and in movies, right? The trust fund babies and all that. Probably not to the extent, but the concept of it, does have, does ring a bell of truth within that as well. Setting up trust, something that's multi-generational, that actually lasts as well. HIBA will be, you can actually apply it. Most commonly known for most people will be for takaful policies, but it can actually be applied for other. HIBA basically means gift as well. It's actually not limited to Muslims only. So actually, as a non-Muslim, you can actually use HIBA as well to make sure that those assets does go as a gift. Yeah, and it can even be for other instruments as well, such as for tabung haji, amanah saham. Bumi Putra can all be the HIBA as well. Power of attorney, basically a legal document granting someone the power to actually make certain decisions on your behalf. A buy-sell agreement, this is commonly used for business owners, as an agreement that, you pass away, what actually happens, how do you determine the value of, your shareholdings, who among your partners, for example, gets first say, in actually taking it up. Because you also want to avoid the scenario, let's say you're a business owner and you pass away, then imagine if it just goes to your spouse. And that's going to create conflict, with a business suddenly, your spouse who maybe has no knowledge of the business suddenly comes in and there's certain expectations from the other partners for her to do certain things and etc. So a lot of conflicts etc. can occur. Matrimonial assets or harta sepencarian. This is usually more relevant for Muslims, as basically there are certain restrictions in place. For example, for Muslims under the wasiat, only 1/3 can actually be given as gifts actually. And how do you actually make sure that your spouse, who has been directly or indirectly helping you as you advance in your career or your business, etc., gets the fair share that she's due as well. There can be offshore options as well, which may have certain tax and other benefits as well. If you're large enough, it can even go into the aspect of family foundation, where this is increasingly popular among the high net worth population as well. So foundation would then have guidelines. You can have charities, do philanthropy through that as well. You can have like overall decision making. You can even hire actually a fund manager actually to take care of the funds for your family and all the generations beyond that. So definitely a lot of different tools. So really it looks at what your needs are. But for everyone, at the very least, you need to be doing your will writing and your nomination. A quick note on nomination as well. For a lot of people, nomination, one key thing will be actually their insurance policies as well. And one key distinction here is to make sure that if you want to make sure that it will go to your beneficiaries as the nomination, and it's actually creditor proof. Yeah, that means they will get it no matter even if your liabilities, creditors, etc. Is that it needs to be a trust nomination. So from an insurance side, a trust nomination means that the beneficiary needs to be, if you're single, it can only be your parents. If you're married, it can only be your spouse and children as the trust nomination. Yeah, so a note of that, So if your insurance policies and you just name your friend as the nomination, do know that it's not creditor proof. Yeah, so do take note of that.
Ooh, okay. Okay, so for our audience who are with us, if you have questions, do put it in the comment so that I can bring it to Stephen after this. We do have a question earlier about the family trust. Kenneth wants to hear about the setting up of family trust. Would you like to take that now or later?
Sure, yeah, since we're on here as well.
Yep.
So family trust can be in different ways and forms. It can be as simple as a trust you're setting up of a family. Technically not a family trust, but a trust that's set up in your own name. You can set it up while you're still alive, or you can set it up with certain instructions that the execution of the trust will only happen at a certain timing. Actually, for example, after you have passed away, or you're in a coma, or disability, or you go missing actually. And the last one is especially interesting as well. Do you all remember, the MH370 tragedy that actually occurred and recently was in the limelight again, due to a certain offensive comedian. But with that was that actually the government actually had to step in and say that all those people who are in the plane are actually legally declared as passed away actually, because if not, you're missing, you're basically in limbo actually. All those assets, whatever was there, cannot be distributed until the person actually has passed away. So those are risks that can actually occur. So setting up a trust, you can actually put in specifications on how that is actually handled. Once you've set up a trust and your trust has been up and running for at least 5 years, provided you set it up, without any ill intention or trying to run away from bankruptcy or anything like that, it is creditor proof after 5 years. And that's also very important as well. For example, if you're a professional or, have a risk of actually being sued, like being a doctor or a lawyer comes to mind, to actually safeguard and ring fence your assets actually that are put into the trust. And then you can actually, with the family trust, actually set up instructions of, how it's actually going to be run, how it's going to be invested, how and what are the terms and conditions for it to actually be withdrawn actually. Yeah. So again, a lot of different assets can actually go within the trust, and basically your instructions and wishes in order for it to last, multiple generations.
So how is a trust different from a will?
All right, so it's actually a common misconception is, oh, do I do a trust or do I do a will? It's really not an either or actually. So you should still have your will with all your assets, but you need to be thinking, okay, what assets do you want to put in the trust? What assets do you want to actually ring fence off? Do you want to be distributed in a certain manner or way? Do you want that, because with a will, let's say you pass away, all your assets will then be liquidated and then distributed for all the liquid assets that are not property. But with a trust, you can actually have instructions that those investments, whatever, still continue to grow and can continue to actually be given out and paid out. So much more control. And with the trust being a separate entity itself. So it's more of, you start with having your will there. And once your assets are a certain size, probably a good figure to look at, minimum $1 million, but I think for most people you're looking at 3 million above. If you're looking at setting up, family trust and foundation, something that's much larger in size, you're probably looking at least 8 figures, so 10 million, 20, 30 million and above. Yeah, so that's another whole chapter itself.
Okay, well, there are a couple of follow-up questions. I think we can take it now. So first question is that what does it take to set up a family trust? What are the pros and cons and tax implication? And the second question is, how do we initiate the process? What kind of professional services do we engage?
Sure, great questions there. And yes, you're right. There's no free lunch. There are costs actually involved with setting up the trust in itself. It is actually much lower cost if it's actually liquid instruments, things that are investments, etc. But things for property, etc., the cost can be pretty hefty if you actually put it in within the trust itself. The actual calculations vary a lot. Unlike wills, where it's much more clear cut. For just about all will writing providers, generally the rule of thumb is the longer the will is, the more clauses there are. Then by certain bandings, then there'll be different costs for that, and also whether it's a new will or a rewrite of the will, that will also have an impact as well. But the moment you're looking at the trust, it actually depends on how complex it's actually written. The closest would be, probably like, like writing a contract actually. Yeah. So again, the complexities and all that would actually determine the cost of actually setting it up within the trust itself. Yeah. As for tax implications of the trust, yes, once assets are put in, those are actually taxable. Over the last couple of years, our Inland Revenue Board, basic tax authorities have been a little bit stricter when it comes to assets as well, even if it hasn't been distributed yet. So the moment those assets are put in, it's actually calculated as the value. So let's say there's an insurance policy where the payout or the sum assured is, let's say, $1 million. The taxation would be on that million actually, even though it actually hasn't been paid out yet. So there are, increased upfront costs that you would want to consider as well. Yeah. As for the process of writing it up, again, it depends, how complex you want the trust to be, what things you want to put in. Most of the time you're working with a trust company, so you're actually not working with an individual actually. So you're working, and let's say your financial planner will be there to guide you. Okay, these are all the options and all that. Then we'll bring in the trust company people, the experts, and let's say you need a fund manager, you need this and that, and we will basically be the center point, representing you on your behalf to help you to negotiate and put everything in place for you and your family.
Right. So just to summarize what we have, I think this is family trust is something of topic of interest to many of our audience. So okay, we've talked about the cons, right? Yeah, it will take time and effort and cost to set up as well.
We're talking about years actually, not even months.
Yeah.
We're talking about years actually to set it up.
And yes, you have to pay taxes on that. So so then what is the point of consideration for a high net worth person, right? When do I get to a point where I decide, okay, I should now consider a trust?
All right, there's a lot of considerations, but for me, I think the key word is actually control. So if you want your assets there, that we worked hard to accumulate over a period of time, and you want control on actually how that actually gets distributed, what happens to those funds actually after you pass away, then that that will be actually the key point of the trust. How much actually should go for family, how much actually should go for charities or organizations or philanthropy, etc. What are the things or the causes, etc. that you want to support? How do you reduce the risk actually of the funds being squandered? Because that's the saying, right? Wealth doesn't last more than 3 generations. I used to think that was an Asian saying. Apparently it's not actually. It's actually quite global. Even in the US and all that, they have actually very similar sayings that wealth doesn't last more than 3 generations. So it's really a global thing that we're saying. So with trust actually helps put a lot of safeguards in place actually to make sure that those assets will actually last for multiple generations and generations to come. And if you set it up well enough, the wealth can actually grow at a faster pace than the distribution, for example. So it could last for a very long time.
All right. Yeah, let's move on a bit there. By the way, for the audience, if you have questions, do put it down in the comment. And if you are following so far, please put yes on the comment or give us a thumbs up. All right. So, okay, quick question before we move on. How long can the trust last?
How long can the trust last? All right. So looking into it is definitely going to last you more than one generation. In Malaysia, it would last at least 100 years actually. So there's already multiple generations, and then depending on jurisdiction and how you can write it, it can actually last perpetually actually.
Right. So it all depends on how you
how and where you actually
right?
structure it out. Yeah. And again, you're talking about multiple assets, large amount of assets, chances are you don't have all your assets in one country as well. Yeah. So again, there's more complexities with that.
Okay. But just to put it in a context, estate planning is not only for the rich, right? So let's talk about this.
Yeah. So again, estate planning, a lot of times we think, it's for the rich or people who are going to kick the bucket. It really is not. Again, we don't know how long our lifespans are. Maker does. So you should be looking at something that's actually part of your planning the moment you actually have assets that are worth distributing. The moment that you actually have dependents. These are times already that you want to think about actually. So one way is that I've given you a free calculator here, and you can actually key it in. It's just a very simple one, and once you key it in, it will show you exactly how immediately it actually gets distributed. And then you got to ask yourself, is that how you actually want to get it distributed? Does that fulfill your wishes? Because if you don't say, then basically the law takes precedence and it just gets distributed, as per guidelines. Yeah, and there's a little bit of nuances between how it gets distributed in Peninsular Malaysia versus in Borneo, Sabah, Sarawak, for example. But just as a very general one, it actually goes to your spouse, children, adopted children, parents, and if there's no surviving spouse, then it goes to the next level to brothers, sisters, grandparents, uncles, aunts, great grandparents, great uncles and aunts, and if all that are not around, then the government thanks you for your contribution. So again, you need to still be looking at how you actually want to structure that out.
All right. So can you share with us the fees involved as well, if we were to do, yeah.
Sure. So if you don't have a will, very likely you will be using a public trustee like Amanah Raya, where the cost can actually go up, to up to 5% actually of the entire estate. Yeah. So you need one question you need asking, is one, how much would it cost, to pass away without a will, with a will? And often, the cost will be around 300%, 3 times higher for distribution. So it's expensive to pass away without a will. And another thing as well is, let's say, for certain Malaysians, they still use, for example, a lawyer, for example, to write a will. Then you need to be asking actually if it's actually not disclosed to you, or basically, whoever you're using as the executor of your will, actually, what are the costs actually that they are actually charging for the execution of the will, which, again, can go up, to 5%. Yeah, so for example, this is just for a million. So for example, 27,750 actually would actually go for the cost actually of the execution. And this is already taking into account Malaysia right now. Our inheritance tax is at 0%. It's there, but it's at 0%, and there's always the possibility that the percentages may be reintroduced back again, which will further drive up costs again as well. So in comparison, if you're actually using a good benchmark actually for execution, is that for liquid assets, you should be paying 1% or less for the executorship. If it's for immovable assets, if you remember that immovable assets, those like physical properties, etc., you should be looking at a ballpark of 0.5% or less for the distribution of that. That will be much more affordable in terms of cost. Yeah.
All right. Now, I think the next thing to ask you is the how, right? So can you give us an idea on the process to get this estate planning thing done?
Sure. All right. So this is assuming that there are assets that are worth, if it's 2 million and below, you go through the small office estate. Yeah, and so basically it goes through the land office and then the high court and then the distribution. But basically it's above 2 million. If one is a Muslim, it needs to go through the fire court first, and then after that it would actually go through the high court, and then all those assets would actually need to be collected. Any debts, etc., would actually need to be settled. So this would include things like any unpaid taxes, etc., any loans, etc., that you have. So even if you pass away, you can't run away from paying taxes. Actually, your estate is still actually liable for paying that. And then it needs to be distributed. If one is a Muslim, then it would also need to follow the Farid law for the distribution as well. So this actually shortens, simplifies the process. It can be as short as 1 year. But if you don't have a will, and then the process does get a lot more complicated. Among additional requirements is that you need to actually decide on the executor. So basically all your beneficiaries need to agree on who the executor is. And that itself, sometimes drags on the process. What if you can't come to an agreement of who should be the executor for the estate? Then everyone is just left hanging there. At the moment there's 1% of the beneficiary who doesn't agree actually with the executor there. In addition to that, you actually need to find 2 sureties. So sureties are basically very similar to guarantors. So you must find 2 people who have similar net worth, equivalent actually to the estate involved actually to act as a guarantor for the entire estate. And if you ever try to find a guarantor, that's also not an easy task as well to find a guarantor for the estate itself. Yeah. So all that adds more, much more level of complexity. It often can take, years actually, 2 or 3 years or even longer for it to be actually distributed. Yeah.
Right. So are there more to this in terms of the principles and liabilities?
The key things there. Other things that you look at would be, paying for final expenses as well. Good thing is that if there's a need for immediate cash funds, one can actually approach EPF. The deceased was actually an EPF member, so the next of kin can actually withdraw up to 25,000 ringgit actually from EPF to handle the final expenses. The rest of it would only be distributed later on. All that needs to be cleared, as any matrimonial property, etc. All that needs to be sorted out, and then only the will and the distribution would then actually happen. Yeah. And again, for Muslims, there'll be certain things in place, like only 1/3 of the estate can be to non-Farid heirs, or unless all the Farid heirs actually agree to that distribution.
All right. Okay, so there's a question there I want to follow up with. Kuan Yun actually asked, what about the 80 years rules for the trust to last? I think this is follow up from earlier on. We talked about the trust can be perpetual, right? If we structure it right. What I don't know. I'm not sure what 80-year rule means. Do you know of such?
So if it needs to be perpetual, so there are time limits actually in Malaysia. It's a way of describing that is, for example, like freehold property, technically in Malaysia, technically there's also a time limit to that. So similar to the trust, there is also a time limit to that in Malaysia as well. Yeah. So again, you can be looking at which country and where those assets are placed, but there will be actually ways to actually structure it out that it lasts actually beyond 100 years. Yeah.
All right, and we see rule of perpetuity. Oh, okay. So question from Alex: if the person without will prepared prior had medical conditions such as stroke, dementia, coma, etc., what would be the best action for his family members to sort out the financial and estate matters? Person without will had medical complication. So I think what Alex is saying, this person hasn't written a will, but is not in a condition to do that anymore. Still alive, but not in a condition to do that. So what can be done?
Sure.
Yeah.
There's definitely challenging situations at one time. There's also ongoing costs as well, especially if the insurance is insufficient or there's no insurance coverage as well. Because having the person around, there's also all those ongoing costs as well. And then there's the matter. Tensions are already high at the time, and I'm sure you've heard of or seen people, family members, supposed beneficiaries squabbling, fighting, over this as well. So definitely a challenging time for anyone going through that, and there's no will in place. Yeah. So basically at that point of time, there's really no easy answer to this. But certain things that may help as well and ease the process. One is to take note that while the person is alive, all those assets are technically not frozen yet. So if there are certain assets that maybe were jointly held, joint savings accounts where the other joint account holder has access to that, it may be an opportunity to actually access those funds earlier before it actually gets frozen and enters the estate process and needs to actually sort it out for distribution itself. Other than that, basically will be going through the wishes of the person. It may help to try to bring in a third party to mediate the entire process, someone who has no financial interest or not likely to side with any of the parties involved. That also typically helps as well to lower down tensions and to try to present a fairer view basically for something for everyone to agree upon. Still in short, the key thing is get a will done. That's the underlying message.
Yeah, do it as early as possible. I think another question on our audience mind would be, I want to know as well for assets outside of our home country, right? Of course, in our home country, we have all the legal framework to protect our asset within the country, but what about assets outside the countries, like a broker account in US, for example?
Sure. So nowadays with how global we are as global citizens, basically often we'll have assets outside Malaysia. One thing to note is that Malaysia is actually a Commonwealth country, which also means that if you have assets that are in actually other Commonwealth countries, it becomes a little bit easier because the historical basis of those laws tend to be more similar to one another in terms of the process, the distribution, etc. So it does simplify it a little bit. On top of that, we'll be looking at other assets that you hold overseas. So one way, of course, is that you basically have a will for Malaysia, and then if you have assets in other countries, you have a separate will written in different countries. Certain countries have made it even easier as well. Like for example, in some countries, I think like Australia, for example, has that. You can actually just walk into the post office, write down the asset, and get it done. In a matter of hours. Actually, if you have just a few assets that you actually want to make sure that you have actually done the sorting out the estate portion if anything happens to you. But beyond that, would actually be looking at those assets. Let's say you want to deal from it in Malaysia. Most of the time, these brokers do know that, for example, brokers or other platforms, etc., that overseas, you would actually want to check what is the policy of handling. If a person actually passes away, most of the times it's actually quite clearly spelled out. Okay, these are the requirements. These are the things that you actually need to show as proof, etc. And then they would do the utmost best to actually follow those to actually get distributed. And from what we've heard and seen going through, most of the time the process is fairly smooth. You just need to make sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, all the documentation is there, and then they will proceed to actually handle the distribution. So it still goes into estate, and then it actually then gets distributed as per the wishes, actually, for example, in the will.
Yep. Yeah, and just to assure everyone, because I've gone through that process, not for myself, because what happened a couple of years ago was that one of our graduate, he passed on, unfortunately, and he had assets in the form of stocks in his US broker account, and the wife got in touch with me, and I actually helped her to connect to the broker, and she had everything in place, right? All the wills are properly done and so on, and she got all the money back within 2 months. Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable time frame. So and that's during the Christmas period, right? If not, I think it would have been faster. So key thing is, have your will and whatever it is, estate planning process done, and you don't have to worry about whether your assets is in which country. Of course, some countries are easier, some countries not so easy, but make sure you have that. So next question is from Kwan Yun again. What about digital asset? Good question. You know, this, yeah, NFT, crypto, what about those?
All right. So definitely a growing interest. You know, I think Malaysians we love having our digital assets as well. Yeah. So basically, from a legal point of view, digital assets are actually still not recognized actually as assets in Malaysia, unfortunately. All right. But you can actually list them in. You know, certain providers do have. You know, they have come out. Yeah, I think it's quite innovative. They have like a digital ledger actually where you can list down all your digital assets in, and you know how you should be distributed, etc. So you can still include it in your will, and you know the process then will be very similar to the brokers. So like for example, we actually heard this, you know, from some of our popular crypto brokers, for example, that are legal in Malaysia. So they reassured us that, you know, if anything happens, you know, very similarly, just provide, you know, all the necessary documentation and proof, and they will basically follow that and do the distribution, yeah, as in a fairly fast manner. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we've almost reached the 1 hour point. So just want to wrap up by asking you to give some advice on how we can approach this, right? I mean, we've learned that this process that we need to go through to get this set up properly. We want to make sure that you know, we cover all the blind spots, and we, you know, for those of us who wants to get someone, an expert to help us with this process, right? What can we do and how should we approach it?
Sure, great questions there, Terence. So really, you know, it's really, I would say, I really would urge everyone to go ahead and write your will if you haven't yet. You know, don't let, you know, that small cost of, you know, a few hundred ringgit stop you. You know, think about, you know, all the potential risks, you know, issues, and it's really costly actually to not actually have a will written. And you really don't want to. It doesn't affect you, but you know, imagine your loved ones actually having to go through that process, and it's really challenging. Yeah. So really look into your estate planning. You know, how that actually can fit in. Other quick tips that comes to mind as well is, you know, work with a reputable provider as well. Seriously consider using a trust company because of the perpetuity. So it is actually in our laws as well. So let's say you do it with a trust company. If for whatever reason the trust company, you know, ends up becoming insolvent or, you know, ceases to exist, another trust company must actually step in to actually take over and handle all the existing ones, so that makes sure that there's continuity there. Yeah. Another thing is basically the structuring of the you know, let's say you're starting with, you know, just a will writing itself. It doesn't have to be overly lengthy actually. You know, I just want to call this up because, you know, it does get on my nerves, you know, and boils me that there are certain so-called estate planners out there where, you know, they purposely lengthen the number of clauses written. They list down, you know, each and everything just so it's longer, so they can make a few extra bucks. And I think that is really unethical actually. So instead, you should be, you know, just listing down my assets, like say like your bank accounts. You don't need to list down each and every bank account there. And then what happens the moment you open a new bank account, close a new bank account, then you have to update your will again. You know, that just doesn't make sense actually. So, you know, list down all by different all the asset groups and categories. But that also means that you need to have your proper documentation in place for all your financial records, you know, where those accounts are, where all your liabilities, loans, etc., all at. So, you know, whether it's physical form or in digital form, to make sure that you have all your records, financial records in place. Yeah. So with that, you know, hopefully today, you know, we can really see that, you know, what estate planning and entails, at least get started thinking about that process, seriously consider at least writing a will. And then, you know, if you have more assets, you know, whether a trust, you're a business owner, things like buy-sell agreement, etc., may actually come into place as well. Yeah. Again, this is more an overview. We aren't going in depth, like, you know, or, you know, how setting up, let's say, a family trust can help you gain a PR in another country, for example. You know, I think this topic, you know, there's a little bit more advanced, but, you know, again, there are other options and possibilities. But basically, you know, the key thing is really just taking care of your loved ones according to your wishes. Yeah.
All right. So, yep. And I think this session has been an eye-opener for many of us. And, you know, to benefit our subscribers, our students, we have requested Stephen to give you something special. Please share this special access with them, Stephen. What is it about?
Sure. So on my side, I'm also the founder of MyPF. So one of the top 5 personal finance sites in Malaysia. Most of our content is free, but we do have some additional resources, templates, etc., which you can access. We're really glad to have this session together with Beyond Insights. So you can go ahead and scan in the code. I believe you can share the URL as well. Basically, the promo code is BI15. B for Beyond, I for Insights, BI15 to get 15 days access, and you get a free complimentary talk with actually a licensed financial planner from my firm, Vantage, actually. So you can ask them about estate planning or any other areas that you actually want to have a chat with a financial planner on let's say holistic financial planning, investments, retirement planning, risk management, wealth distribution, estate planning, and so on, so forth. Totally no charge. No products will be pushed. I can guarantee you that. But basically, we're really on a mission, to help transform the financial industry in Malaysia. Yeah. So looking forward to you guys talking to a licensed financial planner.
Yep. I definitely encourage all of you to talk to Wealth Vantage. As I can vouch for the fact that they are neutral, right? Like Stephen said, they don't push any products. They are not affiliated directly with any other companies offering their products or whatsoever. So they'll be able to give you a neutral perspective on what is the best path or best route to take in every area of your financial planning aspect. All right. So it's 9 o'clock, so we will end this session. Any parting words you would like to share with our audience, Stephen?
Sure. I would say that we really should count our blessings with whatever assets that we have accumulated as well, and really for your loved ones, I believe for those with faith as well, a number of major faiths, do also encourage as well estate planning as actually a key part and responsibility that we should actually be doing as well. Yeah, so really it is a responsibility of all of us to make sure that we care for and we plan out for ourselves and our loved ones to really be good stewards of the assets that we have been blessed with.
That's right. So that's the keyword there, stewardship. We are called to be good stewards of everything that is given to us and not to take those for granted. All right. So I think that's a great message to end this session. Once again, I want to thank Stephen and look forward to more sessions with him in the future. So for those of you, especially Beyond Insights graduate, if you have any questions for Stephen, feel free to let us know, message us or put in a comment, and we'll do our best to forward that to Stephen and also Wealth Vantage to help you in your financial well-being. All right. So once again, thank you very much, Stephen. We'll meet again in the next session. And
thank you, Terence. Thank you, everyone.